and systems have certainly evolved. Just look at the first generation all the way up to the current one. But what about when a game series itself evolves?
I'm talking about the Jak series specifically, when you see a series evolve and evolve quickly. Yeah, Mario and Sonic have evolved as well, but that was more of a forced evolution as they were long-running series and gaming icons that had to change with technology. But the Jak series is different. This is more of a natural evolution, as while each game changes as the story builds and each game is not self-contained like most games and their sequels. Each game in the Jak series picks up right where the last one left off, or at least relatively close to.
And the main reason why the Jak series evolves over the course of its 3 games is because of the very immersive and very epic storyline.
Jak and Daxter started development in 1999. Only 2 programmers were working on it at the time, as other staff members were working on Crash Team Racing. When the PS2 was released, the rest of the team joined in and started working on the game. Over the course of 3 years, they made various tweaks to the game engine so that there were no load times or fogging, allowing you to see other levels in the distance as clear as crystal. It was very rare to see a game that used CDs as its physical media to not have any loading screens when transitioning from area to area. Some games did a really good job of hiding the loading screens like Spyro the Dragon or Ratchet and Clank.
Actually, Jak and Daxter has a bit of a tell when it's loading. Whenever Jak slows down when he's running, that's when you know it's loading something.
The technique is called dynamic loading, where certain techniques are used to hide the fact that the game is loading in the background. The most obvious type is elevators like in the first Mass Effect, or things that can be referred to as speed bumps, like in Metroid Prime when you hit a door and it takes a few seconds to open. More and more games use this technique to give a seamless transition from place to place to get rid of those archaic loading screens, because a loading screen really does ruin immersion, although there are times when dynamic loading fails, causing the game to lock up.
So what type of game is Jak and Daxter? Well, it's a collectathon like Banjo-Kazooie, except for the story is much deeper.
There's probably going to be some comparisons here. Jak is Banjo, the guy who does a lot of the work. Daxter is Kazooie, the wisecracking sidekick. The Precursor orbs are those musical notes, and power cells are jigsaw pieces which are needed to advance throughout the game. You get power cells for doing missions for NPCs or from just finding them strewn about the area, like in Banjo-Kazooie. I know that other platform games before Banjo-Kazooie have done better, but that game had a certain uniqueness to it, and Jak and Daxter has a very similar feel to it. I looked to see if the game was inspired by Banjo-Kazooie during development, but turned up nothing.
I'm dead serious. Play Banjo-Kazooie and then play Jak and Daxter, they feel almost identical.
Now, do not take that as a criticism. In fact, it's a compliment. Banjo-Kazooie is a great game, and the collectathon platform game is a necessary one to every console as long as it's done correctly. And it should be easy to do as it's a basic type of game, although Bubsy 3D has proven that it's incredibly easy to screw up this genre. Now, the controls are a little loose, and that's a good thing for this type of game as it allows you to leap and bound along platforms very fluidly. In some areas, it can be a little problematic, mainly in confined corridors where there's a lot of small platforms, like in the Lost Precursor City. And when jumping, Jak feels like he loses momentum, and it's a little bit more noticeable when he double jumps.
Although I wouldn't call pulling your knees up to your chest a double jump.
Now, I said that it feels like Jak loses momentum when jumping. That does not mean that he does. It just feels like he slows down. The double jump gives you almost no additional height, but does give you a bit of extra distance. It almost feels like the double jump is pointless and would be more efficient to have a single jump with a max set height and distance that depends on momentum. You also get a high jump if you crouch down then jump, or a long jump if you hit the crouch button while running and then jump while rolling. You can perform a thrusting punch with a square and turn it into an uppercut if you jump during the middle of it, and Circle will do a spin attack similar to Crash Bandicoot.
And when Jak spins, it looks like he's smashing enemies with Daxter, which makes using it oh so satisfying.
Daxter is pretty annoying as a character, but he's meant to be the comic relief, but there's times you wish he would just stop talking. And each time you die on the ground, Daxter will shove his face in the camera and say something stupid, and during cutscenes, he annoys the other characters. Kira's voice is a little grating on my ears, and her voice doesn't match how the character looks, which I find to be important, because that makes the character all the more believable. I like Samus as he's the only character that puts Daxter in his place every time he gets too annoying. Now, I do like Daxter, but not in the large doses that were given in this game.
And I know that someone is going to say that he plays a smaller role and develops more as a character in the later games. That's why this is a part 1 of a 3-part series of reviews.
In terms of story, it's pretty basic. Jak and Daxter go to an area where they're not supposed to go. Daxter falls into a pool of dark eco, which hurts or kills you in the game, but here it turns Daxter into a creature called an Ottsel, a hybrid of otter and weasel. There's other types of eco as well. Green for health, blue to move faster, yellow for fireballs, and red makes you stronger. The story goes from a quest to turn Daxter back to normal, to saving the red, blue, and yellow sages from Gull, the dark sage, and his sister Maya.
Overall, it's a pretty basic story, nothing too complicated, and can be enjoyed by everyone. But when Jak 2 and 3 come about, the story gets a lot more complicated, but that's for later.
The game is pretty long as you need to collect power cells, by either finding them or getting them from NPCs to continue the story, and you'll be traveling across the entire game world collecting them. There seems to be a leap in difficulty when you hit the second village, as some of the areas just punish you if you mess up in the slightest, like the Lost Precursor City, which I found to be very unforgiving for the most minor of slip-ups. But you do get infinite lives, so death is a minor setback more than anything. The camera is probably the only true problem I found with this game. You can zoom in and out and spin it around, but you can't pan it downward to make judging the space between gaps or enemies easier.
Before I give my final score, I'm going to talk about how this game has aged.
I rarely talk about how the game I'm reviewing has aged. It's not the driving force of my decision, but more of a background influence, and starting from now on, before I close the review, I will talk about how a game has aged. So how has Jak and Daxter aged? The answer is not that well. Jak and Daxter is a collectathon game with an entertaining story and good gameplay, but the collectathon game never ages well, because you subconsciously know where everything is when you go back and play it.
That's not a strike against this game, it's a strike against the genre. Collectathons, like point-and-click adventure games, are pretty much a one-and-done type.
A collectathon platform game is important because it usually gets a system rolling and is targeted towards everyone. I love Jak and Daxter, the gameplay is fun, the characters are awesome, and the writing is funny, and the animation is amazing. But this is the third time that I've played the game, and this was just for the review, and I don't see myself playing it any more times than that. Maybe in 10 years I might play it again for nostalgia purposes though. Like Banjo-Kazooie, it's a fun game, but how many times can you play a game where the premise is to collect things? Like I said, it's pretty much a one and done type of game, unless you're into speedruns.
Jak and Daxter is a great game, it's just that collectathon games do not age well past the generation they're part of. But with Jak 2, the formula has changed, and we'll see that next week.